Anthony Franciosa was arrested right at the scene after a violent altercation on a film set. A rising star, newly backed by Hollywood, suddenly became a name associated with violence overnight. The police arrived, production came to a halt, and the press immediately labeled him a dangerous talent. That moment did not just interrupt a project, it opened a question that Franciosa would never escape for the rest of his life. Was he an exceptional actor, or a man constantly standing on the edge of collapse? Few people knew that behind the stage lights and emotionally charged performances was a childhood marked by abandonment, growing up in poor neighborhoods and uncontrollable bursts of anger. Franciosa did not enter Hollywood with confidence. He carried wounds with him, and it was those very wounds that created a magnetic and intense actor audiences could not look away from, yet also drove him to destroy every opportunity he had. He was once nominated for an Academy Award, once stood alongside the biggest names of his era, but he was also the one who repeatedly lost everything: roles, contracts, relationships, simply because he could not control himself. Success came quickly, but the collapse came even faster. This is not just the story of a star. This is the journey of a man torn between talent and darkness. And the haunting question: what happens when you become your own greatest enemy? Anthony George Franciosa was born on October 25, 1928, in Little Italy, New York, a neighborhood where life was organized around survival rather than choice. His father was a construction worker, his mother a seamstress, and everything in the family revolved around maintaining day-to-day stability. There were no signs pointing toward a future in the arts, nor any environment that nurtured long-term ambitions. But that structure did not last long enough to become a foundation. When Franciosa was just 1 year old, his parents divorced. From that moment on, his father virtually disappeared from his life, not in a sudden way that could be remembered, but in a way that never truly returned. There was no relationship maintained, no clear memory to name, only a prolonged absence over time, where a part of the family was never completed. He grew up with his mother and aunt in a space that still offered care, but lacked a clear structure to shape behavior and emotion. There was no stable system of discipline in his early years, and his reactions later in life rarely passed through a pause long enough for adjustment. When placed in high-pressure environments, his responses often came before any effort to regulate them. After leaving high school, Franciosa did not step into a clearly defined career path. He took on survival jobs: welder, cook, and ship steward. These environments did not allow for slowing down. Everything moved continuously, demanding quick reactions and direct pressure. In those spaces, emotions were not processed. They were either used immediately or pushed aside. His path to acting did not begin with a long-term decision, but with a very small moment. During a visit to the YMCA to take free dance lessons, he happened to see an audition for a play. With no preparation, no underlying goal, he tried out and was cast. That moment was not a revelation, but it opened an entirely different space. There, the reactions that once existed only as part of daily life could, for the first time, be held onto and used as part of the work. And from that accidental beginning, a direction started to take shape. Not from a prepared dream, but from an ability that was recognized for the first time. In the late 1940s, Anthony Franciosa began appearing in the New York theater scene not as someone fully formed, but as someone trying to survive within a system that demanded both skill and patience. In 1948, he appeared at the Cherry Lane Theater, a small off-Broadway stage where many young actors tested themselves before moving further. The roles there did not bring fame, nor did they attract wide attention, but they forced him to stand on stage, to hold rhythm, to learn how to exist in front of an audience. Around the same time, Franciosa joined the Actors Studio, a highly disciplined acting environment where actors were not only trained in technique, but required to dig deeply into personal experience to build characters. There, and he worked under the influence of Lee Strasberg and approached a method of acting that demanded a high level of emotional truth. The results did not come immediately, but from this point on, he began to hold roles in more restrained and unpredictable emotional states. By 1953, Franciosa made his first appearance on Broadway with the play End as a Man. This marked an important shift in space, from off-Broadway to Broadway, but did not mean he had become a standout name. He was still an actor searching for his place, still needing to prove his ability in a competitive and unstable environment. The roles offered opportunities, but were not yet enough to establish a lasting position. In 1954, he continued with Wedding Breakfast, maintaining his presence on stage. However, this period was not a string of consecutive successes, but a cycle: auditioning, performing, waiting for the next opportunity. Between stage appearances, Franciosa still had to take on various jobs to sustain his life. Acting was not yet enough to become a stable source of income, and surviving in the industry meant accepting an uncertain rhythm of life. In just a few short years, everything began to change at a pace that Anthony Franciosa himself would later admit he was not prepared to face. From an actor still trying to find his place on stage, he suddenly stepped into a role that demanded not only technique, but the deepest parts of his own being. A Hatful of Rain was not an easy play to approach. It dealt with addiction, with breakdown, and with things audiences at the time were not used to confronting directly. And within that space, Franciosa did not stand outside the story. He went straight into it. The performances did not create immediate noise, but the reactions began to accumulate. Critics took notice. Audiences remembered him not for a glamorous image, but for something so real it was almost uncomfortable. The role earned him a Tony Award nomination and the Outer Critics Circle Award. Early signs that he was no longer just an actor trying things out. But more importantly, for the first time, the name Anthony Franciosa began to be placed in a serious position. The shift did not begin with film, but with how Anthony Franciosa started to be perceived on stage. A Hatful of Rain placed him in a role that did not allow him to stand outside the character's emotions. He did not construct the role as a performance, but kept it in a state that felt almost unfinished, reactions that were not fully rounded, pauses that were not smoothed out. That very quality made the performance feel unpredictable, and it was precisely what drew the attention of critics. The Tony nomination and the Outer Critics Circle Award were not just recognitions of achievement, but marked the moment Franciosa began to be positioned among actors capable of handling psychologically complex characters. This was not fame in the popular sense, but a shift in his standing within the professional system. When he moved into film in 1957, he did not change his approach to acting. In the film version of A Hatful of Rain, Franciosa retained almost the entire emotional structure he had built on stage, rather than adjusting it to fit the pacing of cinema. This gave his performance a sustained tension and earned him an Academy Award nomination. In the same year, he appeared in A Face in the Crowd and This Could Be the Night. These roles were not similar in personality, but shared a common thread. They placed him in situations where he had to maintain rhythm alongside characters that were stronger within the script's structure. Franciosa did not push his character to the front, but kept it in a state capable of responding flexibly to what unfolded around him. As he transitioned to film, he retained the approach he had developed on stage, without making significant adjustments to suit cinematic pacing. The Volpe Cup at Venice appeared during this period as a form of recognition from outside the Hollywood system, showing that his style of acting could be received across different contexts. But what stands out is not the number of awards. It is that within a very short time, Franciosa completed a transition that many actors take years to achieve, from stage to film, from an experimental position to one of recognition. Roles, opportunities, and attention converged almost all at once, rather than unfolding in clearly separated steps. What he had just formed on stage was carried directly into film, without a long period of adjustment. That way of working immediately placed him into a larger environment, with a different pace and different demands, while he himself continued to operate with the same original approach. After stepping out of the first wave of roles in 1957, Anthony Franciosa was no longer facing the question of whether opportunities existed, but something far harder to control. Opportunities arrived in rapid succession, continuously, with no space to step back. Major projects followed one after another, shooting schedules overlapped, and his position in each film was no longer experimental, but part of the main structure. In Wild is the Wind, 1957, he entered a space where emotion was no longer contained within familiar boundaries. Anna Magnani brought an intensity of performance that almost had no pause. Each scene felt stretched to its limit. Within that current, Franciosa did not choose to push forcefully in opposition, but to hold back. He restrained the character in a tense yet unexpressed state, allowing silence and half-formed reactions and glances that never fully revealed themselves to become his way of maintaining rhythm. That restraint created a necessary counterbalance, keeping the character from being overwhelmed and preventing the film's emotional structure from sliding into extremes. But environments of such intensity did not stop when the camera turned off. Not all tensions from the work ended when filming stopped. The pressures that accumulated during the process were not always released in the right place. They remained, extended over time, and sometimes found an outlet that was not controlled. In 1957, just as his name began to spread, an incident occurred that was enough to shift how he was perceived. He was sentenced to 10 days in jail after assaulting a photographer. The event did not happen at a safe distance from the public, but right within the space that was shaping his image. From that point on, the boundary between the man on screen and the man off screen was no longer clearly separated, and that overlap itself began to become part of his story. Before the pace could slow down, The Long Hot Summer, 1958, placed him into an entirely different structure, one where power, ambition, and control operated in parallel. Working within a cast that included Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward meant that every scene was tightly calculated in terms of positioning and performance force. Franciosa no longer had the space to freely react on instinct as he had on stage. He had to adjust to fit into a system that already had its own rhythm, where each character functioned as a link within a larger axis of conflict. The collisions did not lie in surface-level climaxes, but in how the characters held their ground with one another in each line of dialogue, in each subtle movement. There, tension did not need to be pushed. It already existed within the structure, and his task was not to disrupt it. Also, in 1958, The Naked Maja opened another direction, moving away from modern introspective narratives into a historical setting with large-scale production. Playing the painter Francisco Goya required Franciosa to work with a figure that already existed in history, where every detail, from movement and gaze to mental state, had to carry a higher level of definition. The salary of approximately $250,000 for this film was not merely a financial figure, but a clear signal from the production system. He had been placed in the position of a star capable of leading a project. But along with that came a different kind of pressure. Not the pressure of proving he could do it, but the pressure of sustaining an image that had already been assigned a value. And within that same period, another fracture appeared. In 1959, He was sentenced to 30 days in jail related to marijuana, along with a car accident that occurred around the same time. These incidents did not escalate into a prolonged public crisis, but they repeated enough to form a pattern, causing how he was perceived within the industry to begin shifting. By career, 1959, everything seemed to move closer again to his own personal trajectory. The character he portrayed was an actor trying to survive within the industry, pulled between ambition, opportunity, and limits that were not easily defined. There was no longer a safe distance between performer and role. The character's choices, sometimes inconsistent, sometimes more reactive than controlled, were preserved almost entirely intact. Franciosa did not smooth out the role to make it more acceptable to audiences, but allowed the unresolved edges of the character to remain on screen. That approach created a sense of instability, but also a high degree of authenticity, earning him a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Drama. Major projects, higher salaries, awards, and significant collaborations all converged within a short period. But within that process, the working pace did not slow down. The roles demanded greater concentration, the environments became more tightly controlled, and his presence in each project was tied to specific expectations. There were no longer safe spaces to experiment through trial and error. Every choice on screen began to carry clearer consequences in how he was perceived within the industry. And while everything on the outside was gradually shaping him into an A-list star, his approach to the work, holding on to direct reactions, not smoothing out rough edges, not reducing internal intensity, remained unchanged. That created performances with a distinctive tension, but at the same time, placed him in environments where stability became just as important as talent. Within productions, opinions about him being difficult to work with began to appear more frequently with each project. After a continuous stretch of acceleration, the rhythm of movement began to shift in a way that was not immediately noticeable from the outside. Anthony Franciosa was still appearing in film projects, still working with well-known directors. And in Period of Adjustment, 1962, adapted from Tennessee Williams, should have been a natural continuation of what he had previously built. But the way he was present in this film no longer carried a sense of leading. The character still held a place within the structure of the story, but was no longer the point audiences followed to track the entire flow. The change did not lie in any single role, but in how opportunities began to shift. Subsequent projects no longer placed him at the center, and leading film roles gradually became fewer. There was no clear fall, no single moment marking the shift, but the distance between him and leading positions began to widen. What had once arrived continuously, major roles, important collaborations, attention, now appeared more sparsely and no longer formed a continuous chain. What had once been accepted as part of his working style began to become a problem when placed within tighter production schedules. In an environment increasingly dependent on stability and long-term collaboration, unpredictability was no longer always seen as an advantage. Remarks about the difficulty of working with him appeared more frequently within the industry, and although not always expressed publicly, they directly affected how he was chosen for projects. Franciosa continued to work, but his position within the system had changed. No longer the default name attached to central roles, he began to move out of the zone where major decisions were made. There was no immediate collapse, but the momentum no longer maintained its original direction. How and what had once moved very quickly in the years before now began to slow down in a way that was not easily reversed. The shift toward television did not occur as a clearly strategic choice, but more like a direction that opened up when film opportunities no longer maintained their previous density. In 1964, Franciosa joined Valentine's Day, a television series in which he played the lead role, but it lasted only one season. The role still carried his familiar presence, a character with charisma, capable of driving situations, but the framework of television imposed different demands. No longer a character developed across the full duration of a film, but one that had to repeat across episodes, maintaining consistency in rhythm and image over weeks of broadcast. By 1966, he appeared in Fame is the Name of the Game, an experimental project for a long-form television model where each character was tied to a specific narrative segment. This was not just a role, but part of a structure being tested in American television at the time. When the series was officially developed into The Name of the Game, 1968 to 1971, Franciosa became one of three central figures, rotating as the lead across episodes. On the surface, this was a return to a leading position. His name appeared regularly, his character was a fixed part of the program's structure, and his presence was maintained continuously week after week. But weekly television no longer allowed the irregular rhythms that had once been tolerated in film. Dense shooting schedules, tightly controlled workflows, and the requirement to maintain consistency across episodes did not allow much room for spontaneous reactions. Conflicts on set were no longer incidents that could be overlooked as in a single film project, but directly affected the progress of an entire production chain. At first, these frictions did not appear as systemic problems. They were handled as isolated incidents, a shoot running long, a scene needing multiple retakes, a schedule requiring adjustment. In a film project, such irregularities could be absorbed, sometimes even seen as the price for a powerful performance. But in a weekly series, each small deviation accumulated into collective pressure. There was no space to wait for a scene to arrive in an actor's own way, nor much ability to delay the entire machine because of one unstable point. Over time, what had initially been seen as exceptions began to repeat more frequently. There was not always direct conflict, but the working rhythm between Franciosa and the production system gradually fell out of sync. Small adjustments were no longer enough to restore balance, and each misalignment left behind something difficult to recover in schedules, in costs, and in how the team began to view the possibility of maintaining the existing structure. By 1970, that tension was no longer at the level of manageable friction. It accumulated, repeated, and eventually reached a point the system could no longer accept. Anthony Franciosa was fired from The Name of the Game, not in silence, nor as a routine change within a television series, but as a decision that had to be made when continuation became too risky for the entire production system. This was not just the loss of a role, it was being removed from the very central position he had just regained after years of stagnation. A weekly broadcast program, a character appearing regularly before audiences, a system operating with stability, all of it stopped at once, with no way to preserve any part of it. In an environment where stability was valued alongside talent, this decision carried a clearer meaning than any comment. His ability was not denied, but the way he functioned within that system was no longer accepted. After that point, Franciosa continued to work, but this milestone left a clear change in the trajectory of his career. Television, which had once opened as a space to maintain his presence, now became the place that most clearly revealed the limits of his working approach when placed within a system that no longer accepted unpredictability as it once had. After 1970, Anthony Franciosa continued to appear regularly on television, but the way he moved through projects began to take on a different rhythm, no longer accumulating over time, but unfolding in short, successive points. Search, 1972 to 1973, brought him back to a central position in a series with a technological and investigative tone, where his character functioned as part of a modern surveillance system. He held the role in a controlled state, less expressive, yet more restrained than in earlier years, as if there had been a certain adjustment in his working approach. But the structure of the program did not last long enough to form a stable trajectory. When the series ended, his presence did not transition into another project of similar weight, but instead began again from a different point. In 1975, Matt Helm once again placed him in a leading role, a character with more action-oriented investigation, requiring speed and flexibility in each episode. Here, Franciosa no longer maintained the same internal tension as before, but operated more quickly, more directly, in line with the pace of television production. What stands out is that between projects, there was no clear continuity. Each role existed fully within its own space, then ended. There was no duration long enough for an image to accumulate into a new identity, nor a sequence of roles close enough together to form a clear direction. The work continued, but it did not create a new center as it once had. Franciosa was still there, within the frame, in leading roles, in nationally broadcast television projects. But the way he appeared was no longer tied to a fixed position. It moved from one project to another, each time beginning again from the start, unable to carry forward the momentum of the previous one. Entering the 1980s, Anthony Franciosa's presence was no longer tied to a fixed center within the American production system. He appeared in Tenebrae, 1982, a European film where the narrative rhythm, character construction, and atmosphere were entirely different from what he had been accustomed to. This was not an expansion into new markets in a strategic sense, but more like a shift into spaces where his presence no longer needed to be attached to a leading position. The character was no longer the anchor of the story, but became part of a larger structure, where the focal point lay elsewhere. On American television, he continued to appear, but mainly in guest roles. These appearances did not last, did not accumulate, and did not create a new image. He moved through individual episodes, completed his role, then left, without leaving a clear connection to the next appearance. The working rhythm remained, but the position had changed, from holding the center to entering and exiting the frame as required by each story. Finder of Lost Loves, 1984 to 1985, was one of the few projects that brought him back to a leading role during this period. The series was built around a character who reconnects lost relationships, a premise with emotional depth and a clear structure for television. Franciosa held the role with greater calmness, less outburst, as if there was now a certain distance between himself and his earlier approach. But even here, the time was not long enough to create a new stability. When the program ended, there was no equivalent project to follow. In the early 1990s, he appeared on stage in the musical Grand Hotel, 1990 to 1991. This was a different space, with different demands, the rhythm of performance tied to music, a structure repeated nightly, and a different form of discipline compared to film. Returning to the stage was not a comeback in the sense of restoring a former position, but more like an adjustment of working rhythm, where he could exist within a system less dependent on the image of a film star. By City Hall, 1996, he appeared in a small role, a brief presence that no longer carried decisive weight within the film's structure. This was his last notable appearance on screen. There was no formal announcement of stopping, but after that, projects no longer continued in the same way as before. The roles gradually narrowed not through a sudden decision, but through shorter appearances, positions that moved further into the background and increasing gaps between projects. He continued to work, continued to appear in films and television programs, but that presence no longer created forward momentum in his trajectory, as what once flowed continuously began to separate, no longer accumulating and no longer leading to a clear next point. As the working rhythm slowed, leaving the center no longer required a defined milestone, but unfolded quietly. so much so that the remaining absence became the most noticeable thing of all. In his personal life, the breakdown did not occur as a single moment that could be named, but repeated in an extended rhythm, where each change was not large enough to be recognized at the time it happened, yet accumulated over time. His relationships often began quickly, without a gradual process, but through an almost immediate connection strong enough to create the feeling that everything could move in a different direction than before. In the early stages, emotions could align, and the pace of life still maintained a relative balance, but that very intensity left little room to step back. And when things began to shift out of alignment, adjustment could no longer keep up with the speed at which reactions appeared. His first marriage to Beatrice Bacalhar began in 1952, when he was still at the front edge of his career, not yet fully pulled into the rhythm of the industry, and still with enough space for personal life to exist alongside work. At that time, work was not yet large enough to overshadow everything else, and external pressures were not yet strong enough to break the structure that was forming. But within just a few years, the rhythm of life began to change in a way that was not easily reversed. Roles came more densely, schedules stretched longer, and the demands of work no longer allowed him to pause at the right moments to maintain balance between the two parts of his life. There was no single event that ended this relationship, but it gradually changed in a way where the two no longer appeared together within the same rhythm of life, as one side began to accelerate and the other could no longer maintain its original place within the shared structure. As his career entered a phase of faster movement, family life could no longer retain its previous form. And by 1957, the marriage came to an end at the very moment he was beginning to gain greater recognition in the industry, not as a coincidence, but as the result of two trajectories that were no longer running parallel. Only a short time later, he married Shelley Winters, and this time the relationship was no longer at the margins, but at the very center of public attention, where every movement took place within a space of higher pressure and less room to step back. Shelley had her own position, her own experience and stable working rhythm, and was also familiar with the strict demands of the industry, which made this relationship, on the surface, appear to have more points of alignment than before. However, when two intensities were placed side by side, they did not cancel each other out, but amplified one another, causing even small frictions to become difficult to control over time. The conflicts did not begin with clear events, but with very small things, such as a shooting schedule that did not align, a state of mind carried home from the set without being separated, or a reaction that occurred faster than necessary. Without a long enough pause for these things to settle, they accumulated, layered upon one another, and gradually changed how the two saw each other without the need for a specific breaking point. By the time the relationship ended in 1960, what remained was not a story that could be clearly told, but the feeling that what had happened had been beyond control for quite some time. By the time of his marriage to Judith Balaban in 1961, things no longer unfolded at the same speed as before, and this relationship lasted longer, nearly a decade, creating a surface that appeared more stable compared to his two previous marriages. There were no longer obvious clashes, nor the same level of public attention, but that very stability carried a different kind of tension, not explosive, but prolonged over time. Differences did not disappear, but were simply not brought to the surface. Reactions still occurred, but did not always lead to direct confrontation, instead existing within silences, within what was left unsaid, in the way the two began to hold back more than face each other. This marriage did not break quickly, but neither did it self-adjust, and it lasted long enough to become familiar before ending in 1970, not because of a specific event, but because what had gone unresolved had existed for too long to continue being ignored. Throughout those years, 3 children, Nina, Marco, and Christopher, grew up within a family structure that was constantly changing shape, where no single event defined childhood, but where there was a recurring rhythm of closeness, followed by distance, of gaps that appeared and disappeared, and a life in which everything could change faster than expected. The role of a father was not always carried out under conditions that allowed stability to exist long enough to form a solid foundation. When he married Rita Thiel in 1970, and for the first time, things did not begin with an overwhelming intensity, and that difference created a structure unlike his previous relationships. Rita did not belong to the world of cinema in the way the others had, creating a necessary distance between work and personal life, where the two spaces no longer fully overlapped and no longer pulled all pressures into the same point. On the surface, this was the most stable relationship of his life, lasting longer, with fewer fluctuations, and not swept into the same rhythm as his work as before. There were signs that he had changed over time, not through large, easily recognizable decisions, but through smaller things, such as holding back more before reacting, slowing down in situations that once easily escalated, and no longer pushing everything to its limit immediately. However, that change did not completely erase what had been formed before, and conflicts did not disappear, but simply no longer manifested in the same way, existing at deeper levels within communication, within prolonged silences, and within things left unsaid at the right moment. Stability, in this case, was not a state achieved once and then maintained, but something that had to be continuously sustained, existing more as a fragile balance than as a solid foundation. And although it lasted, it did not fully heal what had come before. When placing the entire journey side by side, there is no single tragedy that can represent Anthony Franciosa's emotional life, nor any moment that can be isolated to explain everything that happened. Instead, it is a sequence of beginnings and endings, each with a different shape, yet all ultimately leaving behind the same sense of incompleteness, as if everything had gone out of alignment very early on and never truly returned to its original rhythm. Anthony Franciosa's final years did not unfold through a definitive withdrawal, but through a slowing rhythm of life, where work still existed but no longer held a central role. He lived in Los Angeles, at a distance just far enough from the industry he had been part of for nearly his entire life. His appearances on screen became increasingly sparse, not exactly disappearing, but no longer carrying the pressure to assert or maintain a position. The roles, when they still appeared, were more fragmented, like the remaining marks of a trajectory that had already passed through most of its course. There was no specific moment marking an ending. The working rhythm decreased, his presence receded, and gradually, not appearing anymore became a natural state. And he did not create a clear final appearance, nor was there a project that served as a conclusion. Life continued in a less visible form, where the spotlight was no longer the factor determining how he existed. In 2006, Anthony Franciosa passed away in Los Angeles from a stroke at the age of 77. His passing did not occur in isolation, but alongside a name that had once been tied to an important part of his life. Just 5 days earlier, Shelley Winters, his former wife during a turbulent period, had also died. The two deaths were not directly related, but their proximity in time created a sense as if a part of the past had closed almost simultaneously, without the need for explanation. What remains when looking back at Anthony Franciosa does not lie in the number of roles or the awards that can be listed, but in the way he existed within a period of movement in American acting, when method acting was no longer a new concept, but had not yet become a standard that could be easily controlled. He belonged to the first generation that carried that approach from the stage into film, retaining direct reactions, spaces that were not entirely stable, and a kind of presence that did not always follow the safe rhythm preferred by production systems. On stage, he learned to hold emotion in an unfinished state, allowing the character to exist through what was left unsaid. When he moved into film, that approach did not change, only placed into a different space, where the camera captured smaller details, and every deviation became more visible. He moved between stage, film, and television without changing the core of his working method, something rare at a time when each medium had very different demands. His flexibility did not come from complete adaptation, but from maintaining an internal system and placing it within different structures. But that very quality also created another part of how he is remembered. His ability to perform with authenticity, tension, and emotional truth always came with an element that was difficult to control. What gave his characters weight, directness, intensity, and the refusal to smooth out rough edges were also the same things that made him difficult to fit into systems that required a high level of stability. His reputation was built not only from his roles, but also from the way he existed outside of them, where the boundary between the man and the work was not always preserved intact. When Anthony Franciosa is remembered, the memory does not settle into a fixed image. It is a combination of two parallel directions: an actor who brought rare authenticity to roles in the early era of method acting, and a man who remained difficult to fully contain within the very system that elevated him. It is precisely that duality, existing side by side without canceling each other out, that continues to define how he is remembered. The life of Anthony Franciosa does not leave behind a clear outline for closure. What he went through does not gather into a neat conclusion, but is scattered across roles, interruptions, and relationships that changed over time. There were moments when he stood very close to the center and then stepped away without warning. Nothing disappeared all at once, but gradually thinned out until the position that once felt familiar became part of the past. When viewing the entire journey together, what remains is not a fixed image, but the sense of a trajectory that once opened very quickly, came very close to the highest point, and then slowly moved away from the spotlight at its own pace. That story does not close with a complete explanation, but pauses within what he left on screen, where weight and instability continue to exist together, inseparable from one another.